France, the story broke at 10 o'clock at night on a Friday. So for journalists, that's crap because you've all gone home. You haven't got access to your office-based systems till Monday morning. There is some remote access, but it's not very good. But luckily, the site had just gone live with their latest iteration of their forum. And so that without being told to do this, the journalists on the site used the forum to do what they wanted to do, which was communicate with their audience about this terrible news that foot and mouth had broken out again. And it was really interesting to see what was happening on the front. Because what the journalists were doing was reporting news as they picked it up. So actually the first reporting on the forum came from the audience, who said it looks like it's back again. Someone who lived down the road from the farm where it had been picked up reported that. But within 20 minutes, one of the journalists, Isabel Davis, was updating. Firstly, she confirmed, yes, there is an outbreak. She pointed to the DEFRA site, to the page where the information was from the department about the outbreak. And then on a regular basis, as she picked up more news, she was reporting it. So rather than what you'd more traditionally do with a news story, you'd have lots of phone calls, gather lots of information, think about it for a bit, gather it together as a story, and then publish the story. She was, as she was hearing bits of information, she was publishing it, and much more, as you would do if you were in the same room as a bunch of farmers, you just got off the phone with an interesting snippet of news, you wouldn't stay quiet and make 5 more calls. You'd tell the farmers what you just heard. And part of the value of that was that farmers got it straight away. But secondly, they would then interact back. They would either, I mean, a really good example was, partway through it turned out there was an exclusion zone within which you couldn't move cattle between farms to try and prevent the spread of foot and mouth between farms. So as soon as Isabel found out, she reported it. And straight away, one of the farmers on the site came back and said, does it include cows under a year old? Because the last time there was an outbreak of this disease, they excluded cows under a year old. Isabel didn't know, so she went straight back, found out, yes, this time it did include cows under a year old, so she came back and reported that. And that was really interesting to see that the audience directly telling the journalists what they wanted to know and how to be able to respond to that immediately. And then, of course, the audience was actually passing, not just asking for information, but was passing on information. And you could really see that social nature of how social journalism was starting to emerge there. And they won an award for the way they covered that. And what was really interesting at the end, after the sort of the outbreak died down, the response they got from the audience. You know, journalists always like to get letters saying thanks, you did a great job, but I've never seen so much effusive praise of journalists as I saw on Farmers Weekly after they coverage of foot and mouth.
Is it? I wanted to. Oh, brilliant! Oh, not already. Okay. I wanted to kind of start this session by asking you how you start a conversation and how you keep it going.
Start, yeah.
Okay.
I might ask you a question.
Sorry?
I might ask you a question.
Okay.
So don't you just start off with like general things like, you know, how you today, what you've been up to, and then it kind of builds up that depending on what they say, because if they say they're not, you know, they're on a bad day, oh, why are you having a bad day? How come? If they say, oh, I've just won the wood, oh, what was that for?
What are you doing with those questions now?
They're open questions.
But why are you asking them?
Gather information.
Yeah. Why? What kind of information?
Information about the person that you're talking to, yes.
Yeah. So.
Or information that they've found from other people that they've spoken to.
So you're kind of establishing a knowledge about the person, and why are you doing that?
See if it's worth talking to. If they're not going to give you information, then there's no point talking to them, really.
Okay.
Well, in a journalist way, because
Yeah.
obviously you're looking to get something from them, but if they're not going to give it, then
I
cut you off.
guess it's not necessarily just a journalistic way as well. I mean, like if you speak to somebody in general and they're not really giving you answers, and you're asking them a question, you're not really getting a conversation, you generally just stop speaking to them.
Okay. As the conversation develops, how do you keep it going?
So just asking more questions, I guess, or giving your ideas and thoughts about the topic that they've talked to you about.
So stimulating,
Yeah.
stimulating further. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think this model of thinking about conversations is a really valuable way to look at things, because we all have conversations, so we're all familiar with it. And you know, where I work, we've got about 400 journalists, and a lot of them really struggle with this conversational journalism. Whereas actually, if they try and forget some of the stuff they've learned about how you do journalism in print, and just refer back to their own experience of their social life, of how they have conversations. So one of the really common mistake they make when they're trying to interact in these social spaces is to not listen. They come in and they've got something to say and they say it. Now, typically, when you get involved in a conversation, it's very common that you don't come in at the start, you've not initiated it. You come in, you walk into a pub with a group of people at a table, and a conversation's going on. Now, if you just sat down, ignored what everyone's saying, and shouted something, people think you're an idiot. But we do the equivalent of that all the time as journalists. So what we try and say to people is, first, just listen for a start. Don't make those sort of social faux pas. Listen to the conversations going on, and join in with the conversation. Don't try and jump in and shout, and then they compound the mistake. They come in, shout something which is completely irrelevant to the conversation going on, and then they bugger off and don't stay to follow up. And they're still thinking about it in that one-directional, I publish, you listen approach, rather than conversational, which is you listen as much as speak. And the conversation has an existence outside of your own contribution. It's a bigger thing than just the bits that you contribute. Now, actually, we all know that, because we all take part in conversations, and we all recognise those sort of faux pas in our social space. But I find our journalists all often make those mistakes when they're doing it as a professional, their journalism hat on.
So, bearing that in mind, this is a conversation. Yeah, and you've got to start a conversation with Karl. How do you do it? Or in other words, do it.
Maybe in like a professional context, you might say, could you first of all clarify how you say what your job position is, and then talk about what the job
Would you do that in a natural situation?
Not in
That's
natural,
your journalist's
like,
head on, isn't it?
Yeah.
There you go, right.
Very nice to meet you.
What did you do this weekend? Did you have a nice weekend?
Yeah, I had a lovely weekend. I always never can remember what I did over the weekend. Actually, one of the things I always think about what sort of things I'd like to say to a group of people just coming into journalism. And two things. I thought of two things that I'd like to say that I thought would make you feel good about yourselves. That's always a good thing to do. One is that I think this is a fantastic course. I mean, this is about the fourth or fifth time now that I spoke to groups of journalism on courses. And I think the course here is absolutely fantastic. And the things that you're learning are absolutely bang on the things that we're looking for with new journalists. The fact, one of the questions I usually ask, but I'm not going to today, because I know hopefully the answer to you all will be yes, is I ask the students, how many of you are blogging now? And it impresses me when I talk to a room full of people who say they have a passion for communicating and they want to be journalists. In a room full of 30 people, 3 of them put their hand up and say, I blog regularly. We're very seriously thinking now about not taking on people at that sort of beginning level of journalism. If when we ask them that question, tell us about your blog, they look at us blankly, because if you say you're passionate about journalism and communicating, the tools are there for you to do it now and you're not doing it. It's like going to Sony Music saying I want to be a rock star. When they say play us what you do, you say I'm waiting to learn to play something till you give me the job as a rock star first. And the second thing is, this is a fantastic time to go into journalism, absolutely fantastic. I mean, it's a time of great upheaval, but it's also a time of great excitement, and it's the opportunity that your generation, the generation of journalists going into journalism now, are the ones who are going to set the rules for the way that journalism works in the future. It's the same way as if you go back sort of 400 years, it's really interesting to see the sort of experimentation that was going on in the early days of print. If you read Andrew Marr's book on journalism, it's really interesting. One of the things he talks about is the early days of print. And some of the things which you look back on now and you think that was pretty stupid, but at the time, because no one knew, there were no rules, it was okay to experiment if you made some mistakes. One of the things they did early on in some of the early newspapers was they printed blank spaces in the newspapers. And the reason for that was that newspapers were quite expensive, there was a penny tax on them. And one of the things that happened was you'd buy a newspaper, read it, and then pass it on. And the blank space was for you to fill in your own personal news. So when you passed it on, you had the national news printed in it, and your own personal news written in. Now, that didn't take off, but it's an interesting idea, and I think it just sort of illustrates the amount of experimentation that was going on. Apart from being an early form of user-generated content, we've invented it, but it's been around for 400 years.